So here we are on a wet Monday morning, the British weather doing us proud with all its rain. And I'd like to ask you, we have spoken in the past briefly about one of the ideas that you have that you think could bring about a dramatic change in our rather unusual, strange, confusing, often cruel society that we live in. Can you tell us a bit about that idea?
Well, I have always, well, not always, but pretty much since the age of 6, when I realized that the universe must be infinite. And mind you, by the universe, I'm not restricting myself to the, definition by astronomy. I'm talking about the universe of possible multiverses or many universes. But I've always, since the age of 6, felt that it's infinite. And I thought to myself, as I grew up, why doesn't everybody understand that? Because I was very shocked to find out that most people I would meet of my own age or older had no idea what I was talking about. And once I explained to them the idea that there would be no end, no beginning to all of reality, that even though our lives are relatively finite, that the mind world and the universe that encompasses it must be infinite. So for all practical purposes, basically, there's no beginning, no end to space-time and change. And I noticed that people who hadn't thought about it much, but who somehow were encouraged by me to think about it, found that it was beneficial in their lives. It helped them in many, many ways. So I started developing a specific method, as you would say, a philosophical method of introducing the idea of the infinite to people. And I eventually even wrote a book, or actually I wrote several books, but I wrote an initial book that I tried to get published, but nobody was interested. Well, none of the big publishers. And the minor ones really said I'd have to come up with my own money. So I ended up just self-publishing my first version of my book. But anyway, so that's it. So it's the idea that the infinite, it just, when people think about it, it changes them. It transforms them from mediocre to less mediocre, and sometimes even to being a potential genius, because I think everybody is a potential genius.
Okay. I've kind of always been interested in different types of spiritual practice, and often only as an outsider, but recently taking on various specific methods of spiritual practice, whatever that means. Do you want to elaborate on how you are suggesting people think about the infinite? Because as you say that to me, the idea of words come up. So to think about something often for me is a lot about words arising in my consciousnly, and even the word to think is a word, and then there's the word infinite, and of course words themselves are of course a classic example of the finite. They have a beginning, they have an end, and they're very limited. And so the word infinite itself is of course just a pointer towards something that is obviously completely outside of the realms of the word itself. So what did you develop some sort of practice? Do you recommend that people regularly, perhaps, I don't know, maybe contemplate might be a better word, I don't know, about contemplate on that concept? And how do you personally...
I understand the question. Okay. You're asking me, if I'm not mistaken, because I like to be sure I understand the question, and I think most people in the interviews tend to assume that they understood the question, and they end up, not answering the question. I think your question is, and correct me if I'm wrong, and of course, as you just pointed out correctly, so words are merely, approximations of ideas and feelings and emotions and thoughts that we can never fully, truly, correctly, totally express through words alone. So obviously words by themselves don't suffice. So my method, of course, of opening people's minds to the infinite has included visual cues, such as pictures of astronomy that show show the expanse of galaxies and stars, and gives the people an idea of the incredible distances. I mean, just for example, the distance between this planet on which we live and the sun. It takes 8 minutes for the light of the sun to reach us, 8 seconds. 8 seconds. Well, you know what? I forget whether it's 8 seconds or 8 minutes. It's strange. 10 o'clock in the morning around this time, I'm not as on top of things, but it's somewhere between 8 seconds and 8 minutes. Nonetheless, I have to think about how much time it takes for the light on your ceiling to reach your eyes. It's like you can't even think about how little time that is, but imagine the time it takes, even if it's 8 seconds or if it's 8 minutes, what a distance between us and our sun. And if you were to drive a car, if you could, if the surface of the sun was drivable, and if the obvious gravity issues were not there and wouldn't crush you, if you could drive a car, are you there?
Yeah.
If you could drive a car on the surface of the sun, let's say at an average speed of like 60 miles per hour, it would take you, I think, thousands of years to go around the sun.
Right.
So it would just take you a long, long time, So just to think that that itself, our own solar system, is huge. The distance between the furthest, well, Pluto is no longer considered a planet, but when it was, between the furthest known object in our solar system that is of any significance and the sun is just astronomical. I mean, sorry, it sounds like I'm not making my point. So visual cues was one thing, and of course, I've always made it clear that, an ant, if you put an ant in a drop of water, for all intents and purposes, relative to the ant's experience, that's an ocean. So all we ever really know about anything we talk about is something intuitive, something we sense about it, rather than what the abstract word itself defines. If we ever know anything. I mean, most people, unfortunately, are not, thinking enough, so they take, well, that's my experience, I could be wrong, but most people I've ever met don't really think about, the language and words they're using and the effect it has on their mind and what it means, what are the limitations of words. But if you combine the right set of words and say to somebody the idea of no beginning, no end to space, time, and change, and that, if you explain to them that here's a picture of just one part of our visible universe and how huge it is, and you tell them, well, imagine this, and then you go on and on and on, and you'd never stop if you lived forever and had always lived, and if you were in a ship that could avoid hitting, other things in space, like asteroids and planets and whatnot, and if you could just travel on and on and on in space, you'd just never reach an end. And whether or not that's physically true, whether there's a limit to this physical universe in which we are, and then there's, adjacent ones or not, is another issue. But language, yeah, did I kind of, is that the question you were asking?
Well, to an extent it is. Really what I was...
I do have a meditational technique that I also recommend people use, but it frightens most people.
Well, I don't think you need to worry about that on this channel. We've had some pretty weird stuff, so can you take us through what that meditation might be? Yes.
I developed the understanding from perhaps the influence of watching a movie that was very famous in the 60s and 70s. It was about using this meditation tank in which you're shut off from the world and the fluid in the tank is at the same temperature as your body.
Right.
Altered States is the title of the movie, Altered States. It's a very... have you seen it, Danny?
No, I